Well, hello, my name's Anne Pickering, and until summer last year, I was the HR Director and Chief of Staff at O2 in the UK. Since then, I've been doing some advisory work, strategic advisory work for companies like KPMG, and I'm also doing some coaching. And I'd like to say a big warm welcome to the Inspiring Leadership series and introduce you to Jonathan Bowman-Perks, who's going to be our host for today's podcast.
Thank you very much, Anne. It's great to have you on the series. You were highly recommended. I've heard about you for quite a long time, even though you and I have never worked together. And I do think in the conversation we had before about your life, your upbringing, the stories you went through, and the key themes of authenticity and being yourself and learning from resilience and some tough knockbacks, but actually looking after yourself during all that. And then also becoming a member of the O2 board, which was a great job, and the Chief of Staff. It's a huge achievement. And all that you did in diversity and inclusion is things we're going to be talking about. So welcome, Anne. It's great to have you on the series. Let's go back to your early days and your upbringing and who influenced the woman, the leader you are today. So tell us a bit of your story.
So I was born and brought up in Liverpool, a very proud Scouser, big fan of Liverpool Football Club. My parents were Irish immigrants. My dad was a son of a farmer from Tipperary, and my mother was the daughter of a publican in the north of Ireland, Newry. So very Catholic upbringing, 4 sisters and a brother. I have 64 first cousins. That's how big my family is. And that included, nuns who didn't have any children. So it's a big old family. And it was a very happy upbringing, a bit chaotic, all of us in one house. My mum and dad weren't wealthy. Both of them had 2 jobs for a long time, trying to keep everything together, and they did it really well. I went to a convent school, so nuns have played a very big part in my life. And at the age of 40, when my mum had my little sister, so this is her 6th child, she decided she'd go off and train to be a teacher, albeit in Liverpool. And she'd been a stay-at-home mum. And that was a massive moment in my life, because at that age, you just want your mum to be like everybody else. You also just want to live in a house like everyone else. And we had this big, old, ramshackle house that was a bit falling apart. And all my friends had nice 3-bedroom semis. So, I kept looking over the fence and seeing what other people had and wanted it. But ironically, lots of my friends wanted to have big brothers and sisters like I had. So, interestingly, you're never happy. But my mum going off to train at the age of 40 had a massive impact on my life. And she very much instilled in us all, particularly the daughters, the 5 sisters, that we could do anything. Not in a cocky way, but it was, if you work hard and apply yourself, you can do anything. So she did. I look back and I'll be very grateful for her instilling that into us, actually. Managed to go to university. It was the days when, university grants were means tested. So actually 5 of us got to university and did an English degree based on the fact that I enjoyed reading books, to be honest. And when I used to go home during the vacations, I used to work in Marks and Spencer as what they called a temporary seasonal during the holiday university vacations. And when it came to my final year, I suddenly thought, I really need to think about what I do at the rest of my life. And I thought I'd join the graduate training scheme in Marks if they'd have me. Because I realized several things. I didn't want to be chained to a desk every day. I really enjoyed customers, people. They were very unpredictable. And at that age, I didn't have many smart ideas, but that was one of them. And lucky enough to be accepted on the graduate training scheme for Marks and Spencer. And it was amazing. I learned so much. It was just, but one of the things I loved about it was the unpredictability and customer behavior. I can remember being in Brent Cross, Christmas Eve, 2 men fighting over a turkey. It was bizarre. I can remember helping deliver a baby again in Brent Cross. So the life skills and the things I learned, stayed with me. And also, I still can fold a jumper and put it in my wardrobe, and it's a work of art. So these things stay with you. So good old Marks and Spencer taught me a lot. Left Marks and Spencer and joined an American investment house, very different, like going from frying pan to fire. One was very organized, very structured, very rigid, into Fidelity that was just amazing. It was just like going into a different world. And I was just this kid from Liverpool, and I had my own office. My parents dined out on the fact that their daughter had her own office in London. So that was an amazing time. So thoroughly enjoyed working for Fidelity, and then was made redundant. It was actually quite a good lesson to be made redundant quite early on in your life. To go through it, and you know what, no matter what anyone says, it is personal, and don't let anyone say it's not. It feels personal, but it was good to go through it. It was tough. And then I joined an IT company when IT, the year 2000 was absolutely exploding. And I probably cut my teeth there and did every job in HR known to HR. And it's where I got my first big break. And a lot of people, when they get to a senior position, say, I was lucky. I don't buy that at all. It takes talent and hard work to become a senior leader, but you need to see the opportunities and seize them. And that's where the luck comes in. And my boss was having a baby. And so I went and knocked on the CEO's door and said, could I cover for her while she's on maternity leave? And you don't need to pay me. I was very fortunate. They said, sure, you can cover her, but we will pay you. So that was great. Wow. And my big learning there was I realized that I could do it. It gave me being in charge, it gave me the confidence to realize I can do this. So that's where my interest was piqued about, gosh, how far could I take this? So again, it's not necessarily about, you're not lucky, but it's about seizing the opportunities when they're presented to you. I think that's really important.
Yeah, very much. And
had a fantastic career. And then I got that phone call. It's like getting the phone call from Jurgen Klopp to say, come and join Liverpool. And it was come and join O2. And mobile telephony was just taking off. It was very exciting. And I remember going for the interviews and walking into this fabulous office thinking, this is it. This is where I want to be. And that was 2004. And, I had 16 amazing years in that company. And you know what? Made some big mistakes, learned a lot, thoroughly enjoyed it. Best 16 years of my career. And I learned a lot of things along the way, on my leadership journey. And one of the important ones was authenticity. So often, particularly when you're a young leader, you feel you need to behave in a certain way. You need to look like the grown-up. You need to dress in a certain way. And you need to be officious. You need to wear your hair a certain way. You have this view. And actually, one of the things I learned was you've got to learn to get comfortable with yourself. And all that goes with that, flaws and strengths. And only then can you become a great leader. So getting comfortable with yourself, authentic is the word, is really important. Firstly, it's exhausting trying to be more than one, trying to be a different person. Okay. So you've just got to be that one person. And if you ask my kids or my husband or my sisters or my brother or the people I work with, they'll all say, Anne is Anne. She's just Anne, which, now they mightn't like that Anne, but I am the same person always. So I think learning to love yourself and get comfortable with yourself is really, really important.
And a lovely story thus far. And it resonates with me as a Yorkshireman. So I grew up in Halifax, where they used to say, come all or Halifax, the good Lord deliver us. And that was because in Hull and Halifax, they had a gibbet and they would hang you. See, there was the last places in the country you got hung, so you don't want to be there. And I remember I grew up, I went to boarding school and then I went to grammar school in Halifax and I had some good friends. And I went away into the army and I became a bit of a toff. And I came back and they said, who are you? Who have you become? And so I then started to be back being, I've always had quite a sort of, as my wife teased me, a bit of a plummy voice, but I was being myself because they don't want you to be somebody else. They just want you to be you. Because as you said, I think it was Isadora Duncan said, it's far better to be a first-class version of yourself than a second-class version of somebody else. And it was Oscar Wilde, didn't he? He said, be yourself. Everybody else is taken.
Absolutely.
But tell us more, Anne. Tell us more. And then perhaps you'd talk about some of the proudest moments and some of the darkest moments of your life and what you learned from them as a leader.
Sure. So just on the authenticity piece, I think, great leadership is about trust, and people won't trust you if they can't work out who you are. That's why it's important. So leadership has got to be around trust, and people need to understand who you are. So trust and consistency, it is really important. In terms of the dark, I've had some pretty dark moments, both professionally and personally, and I'll start with personally. 2008 was a very sad year in my family because we lost two of my sisters in the space of 6 months, and that was very sad because both my sisters were married and both of them had children. So it was a very, very, very difficult time to remember, actually.
Yeah.
But I also remember I had a choice. I had a choice how I reacted to the tragedy that had unfolded. And I could either be defined by it, and to be honest, it would eat me, or I would choose to find some good out of it. And I am an eternal optimist, which really helps. And I very much decided that I was going to survive, we were going to thrive, we were going to be a great, happy family again. And, you know, what my sisters taught me, you know, albeit they'll never know, is that having a sense of perspective is really important, you know. And the number of times when I've been managing teams and things go wrong, and all you people out there will know that things go wrong at work, you know, I was just able to say, stop, no one's died here. Let's work out what's gone wrong. Let's fix it. Let's learn from it and move on. Mm. And I look back and think my two sisters, Mary and Una, good Irish names, Mary and Una, gave me that gift of a sense of perspective, which I apply now all across my life, not just at work. So it is amazing sometimes how great things come out of tragedy. And the other lovely things that came out was, you know, when my nieces were getting married, you know, I went along and helped them choose their wedding dresses because their mums weren't around. And I have two boys. So, you know, that was just a lovely thing to be able to do. And to be honest, I owed it to my sister that they bought dresses where they look great in and that they weren't meringues, because they were watching me. I knew they were going to be watching me. But that was just a lovely experience I never would have encountered because, you know, I have boys. So buying the wedding dress was never going to happen. So it is amazing that you can find good out of, you know, some pretty dark times.
Yeah.
And if I look back on probably I wouldn't say it was the darkest time, but it was probably the biggest mistake I made. And I won't go into too much detail, but it was in O2 and I got a calculation wrong. Let's put it like that. It was a calculation I had checked by many people in my team. But at the end of the day, I was the boss at the time. And that calculation, that inaccurate calculation probably cost the company £500,000. And that was not my finest moment. And I was ready to resign over it because despite the fact this was checked by 1 million people, I was the person responsible. But I always remember the response of my boss at the time. He just said to me, don't let it happen again. Just learn what went wrong and don't let it happen again. And I just thought, wow, that's a big person and that's a big company that can allow someone to make a mistake, pretty big mistake, and just say, learn from it and move on. And that was a big learning for me as a leader. We're all going to make mistakes, and how we treat people when they make mistakes, you know, you will be judged by that. And that moment of, you know, it wasn't an easy conversation I had, but, you know, I remember how it felt, and I thought, wow, I was so impressed by the way that they handled that.
Yeah, and those three things that resonate for me. One was the story of John Watson in IBM, similar to yours, when someone came to him and admitted a mistake. And he said, the guy said, I suppose you're going to fire me. And John, as the CEO, said, fire you? Why would I fire you? I've just invested £500,000 in your development. Go away. It's a teachable moment. What have you learned? What are you going to do? And your boss had that, which is a great admiration for him. And in a moment, I'd love you to say his name because he's clearly a very special person. The other two things I want to pick up in is the thing about perspective, the 10-10-10, how important will this be in 10 weeks time, 10 months time, 10 years time? And people do get out of perspective. And in the military, we'd often time and again say, has anybody been killed? No, if they haven't, then we can fix it. And the final one is choice, which I think today, particularly people are going, oh, the pandemic, it's not fair. I've learned a lot about Stoical philosophy. The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday is a great fan of mine. It is Viktor Frankl in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, says between stimulus and response, you always have choice, but we say, this happened, I had to do that. No, you didn't, you had a choice. So I think you've picked out three wonderful things: choice, perspective, and teachable moments. But do go on, Anne. What about some good times? And then the advice that you'd give to your 18-year-old Anne Pickering if you met yourself again with all that you've learned now as a coach.
The other thing I would just say is, having lost my two sisters, the way O2 metaphorically and physically put their arms around me and looked after me was unbelievable. And the learning for me was how you treat your people in their hour of need. In their hour of need, when they need you, is really important. And that stayed with me. So when people are facing tricky personal times, how you support them is really important. And I learned so much by the way they looked after me. And a lot of it was done from a distance. Honestly, I could feel the love and I could feel their arms around me. And the odd phone call they made to my husband to say, she's not had a great day. It was just lovely. So that was a big learning for me, is how they looked after me. And the loyalty that drove me, is unbelievable. I'd walk on, hot coals for O2 for a whole number of reasons, but that stays with me.
And who was the boss? Who was that special boss that you had?
Well, at the time when I made the big mistake,
was
a chap called Andrew Harley, who's no longer with O2. He went on to become HR director at Ladbrokes, and I think now he's retired and enjoying his grandchildren. But the whole, that sense of family that O2 has played an enormous part in my development and how I treat people. I've learned a lot.
Okay, and then the advice to the younger 18-year-old Anne. What bit of wisdom would you give your young self?
Oh gosh, I think I would say it's okay to be different. I'll tell you a story. I was Liverpool, pretty naive. I mean, educated by nuns in a very Catholic upbringing, catapulted into the world of Marks and Spencer, 60,000 employees. And I remember we used to have people who used to visit from head office from Baker Street. That was such a big deal. And this particular, he was a buyer, and he was being showed around Luton store. I remember it well. That's where I started my career. And I was told to go and speak to the buyer and the manager of the store to say that lunch was ready. So I dutifully went and found them and said, excuse me, and said, dinner is ready. And I just got this look from the manager, didn't really understand it. And then that evening, before I went home, I got called to his office and he berated me for saying dinner instead of lunch. And I was absolutely mortified. It's just different where you live in the country. Where I came from, it was dinner. Where he came from, it was lunch. And I'm sure all of you listening got different terms for your different meals. And I remember being absolutely mortified.
Yeah.
But I learned later that actually being a bit different is good. Being northern, working down south, people remembered me. So I had dark short hair and everyone else I knew had long blonde bobs. There's just things that make you stand out, and actually think about what they are and don't be embarrassed. Actually use them to your advantage. So that's the piece of advice, is being different is okay. I learned very painfully, but it was a good lesson learned, as a young, person starting their career. I'll never forgive that manager though.
Well, I think of a couple of occasions being in Yorkshire where my farming friend Tim, I went to see his little daughter, and she was a tiny little thing, and she had a little bag, and I said, "What's in there?" And she goes, "Matty," and I go, "Oh, is Matty a dolly?" And she looked and went, "Are you stupid?" Like that kind of look. And I went, "No, Matty. Oh, you're right, Matty." And then when I was living in York, and the next door neighbour kept talking about their son, and they were clearly very white, but they had a son called Ali, and I couldn't understand. And I just said, "How's Ali today?" And they looked at me, went again that look, and they went, "What are you talking about? Your son, Ali?" "No, Lee, our Lee."
Our Lee.
So,
yes.
So I've fallen foul. Let's go around the Inspiring Leadership Compass, because obviously there's a lot of work that my wife Lee and I have done on that about what makes high performing individuals. But MQ, morals, values. You stayed 16 years in O2. So your foundational values must have matched O2's. You wouldn't have wasted that much of your discretionary life energy and been a board member if it hadn't. Tell us about values to you and what that means, and anything when you've let it slip, and how you get back if you let your values slip away from what matters.
One of the things that O2 really believed, so a lot of companies have values, they're written behind the reception area, aren't they? And everyone looks and say they're nice. The difference is whether companies really live by them. And O2 had values of bold, open, and trusted. And every employee in the company could tell you what those values were. Every time you had a performance conversation with someone, you talk about being, was that a bold enough decision? People would call you out and say, well, that wasn't very bold, Anne. And really, you know, is that a trusting way of leading you? So we managed to create a culture where people, you know, understood the values, but really lived by the values. And we also had a purpose. And you know, one of the things I've learned, again, you know, in my career is, if you get a purpose right, it becomes your North Star. And when you're not sure what to do as an employee, you can stop and say, okay, what's my purpose telling me? So let me tell you about O2. We decided that we wanted a purpose. We were very customer focused. You know, without our, you know, 36 million customers, we'd be out of business. So they were really important to us. But we decided that we wouldn't go and grab an agency to create our purpose. We'd actually create a purpose with our people. So we went out and found that people had energy around this stuff. And that's the other thing, go where the energy is when you're looking to create new stuff. And we put them in a room and we worked with them, and they came up with a purpose. And that purpose was making every day better through personal experiences that count. Making every day better through personal experiences that count. That could be if they're a customer, that's someone in your team, that's your boss. And what I used to say to our workforce, to our people is, if you're stuck and you don't know what to do, go back to the purpose and say, is this making every day better? Because if it isn't, you shouldn't be doing it. If this isn't making it better for the customer, you should be talking to your leader and saying, why am I doing this? And we give you permission to do that. So that's why, I mean, if you get it right, it's your North Star. So that was a very, very powerful way of doing business, because it gave people a real understanding, no matter what strategy, you know, what was going on in the business, whether it was a pandemic, you know, what strategic direction was, is this making every day better? And if the answer was no, stop. So it really gives people focus.
I love that so much. And if I think back to my days as an instructor at the Military Academy at Sandhurst, which arguably is one of the finest in the world at developing people, serve to lead was a motto, but it was also a calling that officers eat last. And, you know, are you really a servant leader? And I think that people who can find a sense of meaning and purpose, and they do work that's meaningful. I mean, you're a coach to a whole variety of different people and advising KPMG, but you've come across where people, they're just making money. You know, what's your life purpose? Pay off the mortgage? Yeah, probably. And like, really? And that doesn't get them out of bed. And so I think making every day better through personal experiences that count is fabulous. Let's move on from moral quotient and purpose and meaning, which you covered beautifully there, to health quotient. You know, mental, physical health and well-being. Very few leadership models have health as a key element of it, but it so has become crucial. We designed this perhaps 5-6 years ago, but the pandemic has made it really front and center. What's your view on mental and physical health, and what do you do to keep in good shape? And when you let it slip, how do you get yourself back?
I think, interestingly, the pandemic has accelerated, you know, many mental health challenges for people. And I, you know, as an aside, I really worry about the mental health of young people today, and how they're coping. My son is a teacher in a teacher's maths, and yeah, he is really worried about what is building up in kids, you know, particularly kids from challenging backgrounds, you know. So I think mental health is a problem now, and I think it's only going to get worse. You know, the progressive organisations had great mental health programs in place, and I think the pandemic has just caused, as I say, good organisations to accelerate those programs. So, and that will stay, and that's fantastic. I think that's really helpful. And just, you know, starting every conversation with how are you is just a really simple way of starting. Start by starting. But one of the things I pre-pandemic and post, I guess, one of the things that I found really important is that you need, particularly as you become more senior in your career and it becomes more lonely, because it does, you need to keep your health. You really need to think about your health and how you keep yourself healthy. And that's, that's about, eating sensibly, getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise. Isn't necessarily about running marathons and being, a size 8 model, but it is about making sure you're going out, you're getting some fresh air, and you're just giving yourself some breaks. And one of the things I'm seeing now in the pandemic is people are literally working 12-hour days, back to back on Zoom calls, 7 days a week, and they can't sustain that. And moreover, they will fall over. And that's, that's the detriment of the business. I used to have someone who worked for me. She was really talented, still is very talented. And she used to work incredibly hard, and she was very, very proud of her work ethic. But what she used to do was work incredibly hard for 8 weeks, and then she'd just fall over, and then she'd be off ill for 3 weeks. And this circular pattern kept happening until I sat her down and said, "You are no good to me." And she couldn't believe it. And I said, you've got to learn to balance everything in your life and manage your life. It's a 3-legged stool. You've got to manage what's going on at home, what's going on at work, and what's going on with your health. If you get those out of kilter too often, you will fall over. And there's always going to be peaks and troughs. But learning how to manage yourself, your resilience, your health, your relationships, your kids is really, really important. It's been sharpened, it's in heightened focus during pandemic, but the light is now at the end of the tunnel. We are coming out of that. And everyone needs to take I really believe everyone needs to take a step back, and just, you've really got to think about your life as that 3-legged stool and retain that balance, because you will fall over. And sometimes, and I've seen this where people are so focused on their career trajectory, they completely lose sight of the people at home, their partner and their kids or their parents. And I say to them, where's your wife in this? Where's your partner in this? You're hell bent on becoming the next CEO. They haven't given a moment's thought to the impact that's having, with the people they live. So as a leader, trying to encourage that your people to think about life holistically, I think is really important, because we get one shot at this life. Yeah. You want people sort of dying saying, "Oh, that was a great career." You want to think, "I was loved by my kids, I did okay by my parents." It's not, "I had a great job at O2." There's much higher purpose than that. So getting that balance right is really important.
So true, Anne. And I think of a couple of examples with clients. One who I described it as, you found that you've got to the top rung of the ladder and it's leaning against the wrong wall. And the other person, he was a bit like a Foreign Legion officer storming from fort to fort across the desert, and there were bodies behind him of people who couldn't keep up, including the family. And he was on his 3rd marriage. And I go, there is a cost to this. Everything's possible if you're prepared to pay the price and live with the consequences. And you don't have any car crashes, but I see lots of car crashes all around you, and you're not seeing the connection. So I think you make a really great point. Let's move on to another one, which is one we haven't chatted before. So I'm just interested in your first impression. We're looking at another area of the compass, and rather than talk about IQ, which is well hackneyed, and it's only 6% of people's performance, whereas EQ is 30% of their performance. But we've changed the IQ to CQ. We're looking at cultural intelligence quotient. Your ability to adapt to different cultures, different people. And you, more than anybody, have had such great success in that. You got the 5th woman on a 9-person board where you got diversity inclusion at O2. That was your initiative. You started by starting, you worked on it, and you did it. So what's your view on sort of cultural quotient and adapting to different ways and different people, different styles, DE&I, really? I'm just interested in your thoughts.
It's really interesting. So a strong culture is a good thing. People know where they fit in, they know what you're trying to achieve. They're there because they want to be there. I used to have a saying in O2 that was, I always wanted O2 to be a hotel, not a prison. And what I meant by that is I wanted people to choose to work for O2 because they wanted to be there, not because it paid the rent or the mortgage. You can create a culture like that where people, want to get out of bed in the morning and go to work and do a great job. The difference is night and day. So the hotel and prison analogy was a really good one.
Very good one.
That said, you don't want everyone to be the same, because that then becomes complacent, and a culture can become, lazy, and you need to bring in new people to challenge the way you do things. And I work with many organizations, and I've heard the phrase, organ rejection. You've got to be really careful, because we have a really strong culture, and if people come in, it doesn't work, then it's organ rejection. And actually what they're saying to me is, we just don't like change and we don't like difference. So there's a fine line to be drawn between creating a strong culture and embracing change that makes that culture even stronger. And all the stats are out there about how, a diverse workforce can make, a company a lot more successful. In O2, we always had we have 34.5 million customers out there. It was really important that the workforce within reflected that vibrant customer base, because only then can you understand what your customer wants. So it's really important that you embrace different. It's too easy to hide behind, we have a strong culture, that person won't fit in.
Yeah.
And if I look, sorry, Jonathan.
I was just going to say, you've reminded me of as a tech company I know, and the founder and a few of the founding members of it, been going a few years now, and it's doing very well. But they all came from a big brand tech company, which is a world famous brand. And they brought that kind of culture with them. And it was all engineers were the best, software engineers, they were the cool guys. And then everybody else was just also rans. And they won't change their culture. It's very much a lads culture, tech lads culture. And it's rejecting people who otherwise would be good, women, people of different color, race, sexual orientation, don't feel welcome there. And they're not prepared to change and adapt to them. And it's very sad. It's definitely sad.
And just building on that, it's very important that the people the companies that you work with, particularly recruitment firms and search firms, that they share your ambitions around inclusivity, because it's just too easy for them to say, we couldn't find that candidate. And, I've always given search firms a target of, when it comes to shortlists, I want a 50-50 gender balanced shortlist, and 25% of those people need to be people of colour. If you can't find that, I don't want to work with you. Because what it's saying is they can't be bothered to work harder to do that. So I think you have to be very demanding also on the organisations that you partner with as well. And there should be some non-negotiables. So I always take a pretty tough line when dealing with that. So it's very easy to hide behind, we have this strong culture, that person won't fit in. And if I look back at the board in O2, the exec team, 9, as you said, Jonathan, 9 people, 5 women. There was the gender lens. But if I look at those 5 women, one was American, one was Spanish, one was Scouse. It was. I don't like the phrase neurodiversity, but it was that those different backgrounds and the different way they thought that made the difference. And you know what? There were times when all of us fought like cat and dog, but it was just the combination of 9 people who were so different made for a really successful leadership team, really successful. And that's the other thing I learned. You don't have to all love each other. We were a really great team, hugely respected. We didn't all go out for beers every night, but that combination of different made for really good thinking, and that's important around a board. That's important in any team, actually.
Yeah, and that's nice. And the sort of cultural intelligence quotient, the CQ, is a wider thing to EQ, which is more of a personal thing which you've worked on and been trying to develop your own leaders. And as a coach, you're trying to bring people on and help others, as you advise KPMG and elsewhere, that this ability to read yourself, read others, manage yourself, manage others, but also read the environment and what's going on, what you can control, what you can't. What have you done over the years to develop your skill in listening and your skill in building rapport and influencing? Tell us about that.
Yeah, as a raging extrovert, as you probably realise, Jonathan, I have really had to I've had to think really hard about that. I would go to the opening of a fridge door if it was there. So, I really have had to, be quite thoughtful about my leadership. And I think what I always tried to do was seek to understand, listen, and to understand what it is that people are trying to say. So that was always my seek to understand first, really, and then act, and then and then you can, be the sort of compassionate leader. And I'm a great believer in compassionate leadership. The best CEOs I've worked for have been humble and compassionate, and they've run exceptionally successful companies. So anybody who says there's no room for compassion in business is just plain wrong. The best people I've worked with have had that sort of strong compassion. And compassion doesn't mean soft. Compassion is just about caring, really. So I think it's really important. But for me, it was seek to understand, and speak less, listen more. And I'll be honest with you, that's hard for me, particularly when you've grown up in a family the size of mine, where it was the loudest voice was the one who got the second portion of apple crumble, to be honest.
Yeah, you and I were laughing about the fact that I married into an Irish family from Bundoran in Donegal, and when I go back to family reunions, which sadly, because of the pandemic, we haven't had for a while, it's just bedlam, and everybody's talking, no one's listening, but they're having such a good crack. But I think this the work of Nancy Klein and that book by Susan Cain, Quiet in a World That Doesn't Shut Up. And I suppose I'm an extroverted introvert, but I have had to, like you, work on listening at the 5 levels of myself, content, context, the unsaid, and then what does it really mean? And it's a lifetime of work, isn't it, Anne? So let's go on to resilience, which you and I have talked about before. You've been through some tough experiences, whether it be the tragic loss of both of 2 of your sisters in a family of 4 other sisters and a brother, which I just can't imagine how tough that must have been within 6 months, to early on in Fidelity being made redundant, or making that error as a group, but you had to own it, of that £500,000. What have you learned about resilience, adversity, and picking yourself back up? Because you are an optimist, so that helps. But what have you learned?
You have to stop and pause, right, and just take in what's happening. So I'll tell you a story to illustrate the point. I was passed over for the job of HR director in O2 first time round, and I found out about it in a rather unfortunate fashion. A, I didn't know they were looking for an HR director for the UK, and B, no one has spoken to me about it. So, my bottom lip well and truly was out, okay? And I rang my boss and said, so you're looking for an HR director? You didn't think to speak to me? I was marginally politer than this, but, and he went, no, that's right, wasn't going to speak to you. I went, why not? He said, because I don't think you're ready. I remember saying to him, I will never trust you again. And he said, I can live with that. Where do you go? Where do you go after that conversation?
Wow.
And it was a really big moment for me. And I went home, and of course my initial reaction was, well, if they don't want me, I don't want them. But then you start thinking, and this is where you've got to pause. Then I started to think, hang on a minute, Anne, you love this company. You love the people in this company. You're learning and being stretched. And honestly, are you ready for that job? Probably not. So fortunately, I had the wherewithal to stop and pause, have my sulk. And by the way, I am a reformed sulker. It's not attractive. It doesn't achieve anything, right? That's, again, being one of 6 children, sitting on the step and sulking. And that was a really big moment for me. And oh my God, am I glad that I didn't leave. They recruited an external HR director, and I wasn't ready. He came in, lovely guy, but I knew he wasn't going to make it. I just knew it wasn't going to work out. But he was lovely, and I supported him. And 9 months later, I got the job. So always stop and think before you take your bat home. These things sometimes happen for a reason, but again, you can choose how you react. And fortunately, I had the maturity, surprised myself, not to just say, well, if they don't want me, I don't want them. Big moment for me. Yeah. And I'm so glad.
Very good. And I resonate with that in a slightly different story, which I'll just tell in a moment. But I wonder if you'd been your boss, I'm just curious why he hadn't got you in and just said, look, we're running for this role. I haven't put you forward because I want you to get more experience and be ready in time. But anyway, that's another story. But my experience was when the head of the British Army was the Chief of General Staff, as it was called, was Field Marshal Inge, who was in my regiment. And he came back to visit the regiment, which only has 40 officers in, to choose his next aide de camp, his next assistant. And there were 3 of us lined up, and I was a new joiner. I come from another regiment, from the Signals. I was an outsider. So I didn't think I had much of a chance. Anyway, he met all 3 of us. And then he called me back in. He said, I've chosen you. And I go, well, that's really kind of you, sir, but actually I'm not ready yet. I've just joined from the Royal Signals to the Green Howards, and I'm commanding a company. And at a young age, as an acting major, it's a great experience for me. And we've got a tour in Northern Ireland, and you know, it's really exciting stuff. And I'd love to do another year. And if it's not cheeky, could I have an opportunity in a year's time? He goes, go away and think about it. Go away and think about it. No one's ever turned me down. Oh God, I'm ready. You know, you just don't argue with this guy. He was fearsome. And so I went away and I thought, I don't want to do it yet. I really do want to command my company and get this experience, which is why I've joined. So I went back to see him and he said, good, have you been thinking? I said, yes, sir. I said, good. I'm glad you have. I said, I still don't want it, so if you don't mind. And I would love to be, no, don't talk to me again, go away. And he found someone else. Poor lad lasted about 8 months, just got savaged by the other person who was the military assistant, who sacrificed him to save his own skin. And he was fired, which would have been me. Now, I wasn't to know that. But anyway, and then I got this call. Well, are you ready? I go, yes, I'm ready, sir. And I had an interesting time. I enjoyed it. I almost got fired twice, but I did learn a lot. But and that's great. Brand, what have you learned from 360? You know, you're big into 360 and feedback, feed forward. What's been the best learning?
Feedback is a really interesting one. So let me take you on the journey I went on to understand the importance of feedback. Just appointed into the job of HR director of O2, everyone thought I'd arrived. And for about 2 days, I thought I'd arrived. And then I suddenly had a massive crisis of confidence because I thought, I can't do this. I could run the HR team, but I can't be part of the team that runs the company. I mean, God, you know, no way. And I was not receiving any feedback from anybody. And there are all sorts of reasons, and very good reasons why, but I wasn't receiving any feedback. And in the absence of feedback, you make it up. You make it up and you get it wrong. And it becomes a vicious circle. And in my head, the little bird on my shoulder was saying in my ear, he's not giving you feedback because he likes you, but you're just not very good at your job. But he likes you, you're nice, you know. So that was what the voice was telling me. I ended up going over to Spain for a meeting, and I grabbed someone I really trusted and said, it's all going wrong, you know, I'm not cutting it, and he's just too nice to tell me and I don't know what to do. And this person bought me a cup of coffee and he sat me down, he went, look, you know, you're 2 months into a new role, it's a big role. Are you doing okay? Yes. Are you the finished article? No. Will you get there? Absolutely. Now get back on that plane and go and kick whatever. That's all I needed. That one conversation set me back on the right track. And that's how I learned the importance of feedback. So I genuinely believe that leaders have a moral obligation, and I choose my words carefully, to give feedback to people. It needs to be clear, because clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Vague feedback isn't good enough. So as a leader, find a way to learn how to give both constructive and positive feedback to people, and it will pay back. You know, it will just pay you back big time. But you need to practice it. You need to find a way of doing it. And most people will be relieved, because as long as they can understand what it is you're trying to say, they will get it. So it was a massive learning for me, and you know, I suffered a bit as a result. But that was a big learning. You know, learning how to give feedback, challenging and the positives, because a lot of people give you the, well, that's not going so well, but very often you don't get the pat on the back. You need a balance. And, you know, when a manager or a leader gets that right, the difference in their team, you can just see that people just grow in front of you.
Yeah, I so resonate with that. And I'm a great believer in appreciation and gratitude. And I've been reading Vishen Lakhani's book. He's written 2 books, but his latest one got a lovely name, The Buddha and the Badass. And he talks about the 21-day challenge, which is one you could probably use in coaching for one of your clients, to give them the 21-day challenge, that every morning, the very first thing they do when they turn on their iPhone or phone or whatever device they got, or their laptop, is they send out, and they've only got 2 minutes in which to do it, they send out a note of gratitude and appreciation to one other person. It can be client, customer, anybody, but everybody does it. And they found the productivity and the extra revenue they make and the profit they make over a year is massive just by changing that one thing. And
wow.
then the 21-day challenge of appreciation and gratitude. And I think that would resonate with everything you've said. And time and again, I'm sure you have this in your own coaching. I found leaders don't give enough appreciation and gratitude. It's like the husband who said, well, I married her 30 years ago and I told her I loved her then. Do I need to tell her again? I think you do. I think you need to tell her every day. And so it's a big thing these days. And particularly, I think, for your children, and Lee and I have got 4 children, and they're 25 to 29, and they really do need appreciation, genuine, specific, sincere, and succinct. It can't be, it's back to your authentic. It can't be phony. It can't be, oh, you've done a great job. Do you remember Mr. Grace? You're all doing well. Thank you, Mr. Grace. And it just doesn't really, it has to really mean something.
Yeah. And I think just talking about your kids, my boys are 30, 28, and I've got a stepson of 28. The world that they inhabit of social media is I think it's horrible. I never grew up with it, so I never had those pressures. And even though they're adult men now, I think the pressure that social media puts on people to have the perfect life, I think is frightening. And I do worry about it. And I'll tell you another story, which is a bit tangential, but it's really interesting. Most organizations have a debt collection part of their business when customers, for whatever reason, can't pay their bills. And it's a tough area to work. It's very tough for the people who can't pay their bills, but it's also a tough area to work in. If you're ringing up a customer to say you haven't paid your bill, it's not a great job. We had great difficulty, understandably, wanting people to work in that area. It was called debt collection. So we got a group of people in the room of our employees and said, okay, we've got to do this. How do we do it? Talk about obvious, but talk about smart. You change it from being called debt collection to debt support. And you train your people at a pretty basic level with a few counselling skills. And both those 2 small moves, the amount of money we were able to collect increased by over 30%. It's just amazing. Back to your point, Jonathan, 1 or 2 small changes can make a massive difference. And our customers clearly felt supported rather than hounded. And our people felt that they were doing a service to our customers rather than beating them up. So I always thought that was a really powerful story. It also illustrates the importance of asking your people what the right thing to do is. You don't, just because you're a leader doesn't mean that you automatically know. And they often have all the answers.
Yeah, very much so. David Marquet was on this series a couple of episodes ago, commander of the USS Santa Fe, and he's written 2 books. I don't know if you come across them, Turn the Ship Around. Oh, yeah. The Ship is Language. And he's a lovely guy, very academic and quite cerebral. But his point is putting masking tape over your mouth and don't be the answer man or the answer woman. This is my intent. What's your intent on how you're going to achieve this? And let them surprise you with thinking for themselves. And comes back to creating a thinking environment, which in this current climate is even more important than ever, with hybrid ways of working and the office being a tool, not a place where, I remember my boss in the army, this was like, goodness, this must have been 30 years ago, Austin Thorpe said, Jonathan, work is an activity. It's not a time or a place. You do work, results only work environment. You get the results done, the end state. And people for so long, I want them all back. And there's the CEO of Goldman Sachs saying, this is an aberration. We'll get them all back. And for Goldman Sachs, it is a culture where they do need to be there and they are brought on, that kind of stuff. But to see as an aberration, I think is a mistake. Can we come back to the social media? Because I think it's very interesting. I've recently joined Clubhouse, which is one of the social media platforms. Yeah. And come along on Friday at between 4 and 5 every week. And I've got a group of about 20 to 30 CEOs, but I have about 6 on stage sharing their experiences as CEOs. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun, but we're going to do it in a thinking environment. But when I go to other rooms, it's like a dog scrap and it's massively stressful because everybody's competing and comparing. Everybody's telling you they're doing really well and they made 6-figure numbers, 9-figure numbers, and I've met no one who's failed. They're just all bullshitting massively and making each other feel inadequate and insecure. And I think it's got to be handled, social media, very carefully. I like LinkedIn. I can use that as a medium. I use Twitter a bit. I use Instagram a bit because you have to, because of Clubhouse. I hadn't done it before so much. And Facebook, I just use as a business tool, not a personal one. But I do think you have to handle it very carefully, because you got 2 boys. I've got 3 girls, and one's a stepdaughter and a stepson, and 2 daughters of my own. And their generation can get really quite anxious, particularly the girls, about looking like this airbrushed model who seems to have it all, and she's done nothing but just have opinions on on social media, and she earns $1 million a year, and they all want to be like her, or on some reality TV show. And so then you get a president that's voted in who's a reality TV show guy. I don't know, get me going on one. But what's your thoughts on social media?
It terrifies me. The England rugby match on Saturday, didn't go England's way. I'm a great rugby supporter. O2 obviously sponsored the England team, but that poor woman who was commenting, absolutely berated by people who felt it was perfectly okay to, call into question in a quite brutal manner the way she handled the post-match interview. And she sat in a car and sobbed. And then good old, England rugby came out and supported her. But it just gives people carte blanche to say what they like, when they like, and how they like. And I just think I think it's very dangerous.
Yeah, I think people should be held to account, and I don't think there should be such a thing as being able to troll without knowing where it's come from, so that person can actually. I think people should actually face charges when they are so abusive like that.
And it actually brings me on to another point. One of the things that we always did in O2 was we wanted to create an environment where people felt they could say what they felt and what they thought. But what we were really clear is that we wanted them to be, we didn't want it done anonymously. So our comms platform that we had in O2 was not anonymous. And I think that's really important. I've worked with organizations where it's anonymous. And it just gives people carte blanche to say some pretty outrageous things. So having a culture where people feel comfortable saying, challenging you on stuff is really good. But with it, having the ability to do it anonymously, I think is dangerous. Well, it creates that toxic environment within an organization.
Yeah, and that's Lee's book that she's writing at the moment, Inspiring Leadership and the Toxic Turnaround. But your values were bold, open, and trusted, and that wouldn't fit with the culture of bold, open, and trusted.
No.
The other day, in a situation with someone, they said, "Oh, I wish you hadn't shared that." Well, I said, we need to be more open about this, otherwise we're just deceiving ourselves. The final 2 or 3 questions. I'm interested in the legacy you hope to leave, and what to you stewardship and legacy means, and then a book you'd recommend, and then we'll do your favorite top tip. So let's talk about legacy, Anne.
When I decided, my logic about leaving O2, it was a really difficult decision, because for all sorts of reasons that I've probably outlined in this conversation. But I wanted to, in my arrogance, go out at the top. I wanted to go out when people thought, wow. I wanted to leave a legacy in place, and I think I would put that down to the inclusivity agenda at O2. We made great strides, and they're still on the journey. But I think we've done an amazing, myself and my team, and in fact the whole leadership team, in its broader sense, have done an amazing job creating a culture or environment where people can come to work and be themselves and tell their stories. I'm a great believer in telling stories. So at the top, leaving a legacy. Oh yes, and having my successor in place. I think it's really important that you where you are in your leadership journey, that you are always thinking about, you're just the custodian of this job. Who are you going to pass it on to, and who are they going to pass it on? So I suppose in HR speak, that's succession planning. But I think it's very important you view yourself as the custodian of that role, and that way you're always looking, to the future, about who are the future leaders of an organisation. And I think that's really important.
That's a really good way of saying it, and it's almost the same way with your sons and my stepson and my daughters, that we don't own them. We're just looking after them while they pass through, and then they go on in their life. And I think people seem to get it wrong in both their job. They don't see themselves as a custodian, leaving things better than they found it.
Yeah.
What about the favorite book? You mentioned Jeremy Hayward, didn't you?
Yeah, there's a book out, I think it came out about 18 months ago, which is called What Does Jeremy Think? And it's a political biography of Jeremy Hayward, who was a civil servant who served under the last 4 prime ministers in the UK. So over a period of about 25 years. And very sadly, he died about 18 months ago at the age of 56, no age at all. And he was working almost right up until a couple of weeks before he died. But what I loved was the story, because his wife has written the book. And what I loved was the fact that invariably, when there was a crisis on in government, the first thing the Prime Minister would say, irrespective of what political party they were, was, what would Jeremy think? And it really got me thinking that he was possibly the most famous or the most powerful non-famous person in Britain. And that's leadership, isn't it? Mm. You know, most people wouldn't even know what his name was, you know, no limelight, just obviously supportive, obviously thoughtful of every prime minister, irrespective of their political colours. And I just thought, wow, that is just a brilliant example of a fabulous leader. I thought so. It's a great book, actually. Highly recommend it.
I will definitely listen to it. I'm dyslexic, so I will hopefully find an audio version on Audible. I listen to 60 to 80 books a year, but I'm looking forward to that because I do like that. And also it made me think that despite the country having a terrible time through probably some poor decision making, when you look at the number of people who died in China compared to the number of people who've died in our country, something's gone a bit amiss. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist that thinks that Chinese sort of planted it here and that kind of stuff. But I think there must be some civil servants quietly working somewhere who planned ahead for the vaccination and got it all right and all lined up. And now I've just been through and had my vaccination on the 20th of February. And, you know, various people I know, like my brother's had it, things like that. Somebody somewhere who no one knows their name really got it right and led the country well, making some key decisions and taking a gamble on some things to bet on getting those vaccines, which has saved hundreds of lives.
And there is, and I can't remember her name, but she's a woman.
Yeah.
So just put that there.
Yeah. If someone knows, and let me know, we'll put a blog about it. So we're now down to, if you'd make, as we discussed before, your introduction to yourself and your favorite top tip, a 2-minute top tip, and why it's special for you, please, Anne.
One thing I'm going to say just before that, and as an HR director, an ex-HR director, some people might think this is a strange thing to say. But it's really important you enjoy your job. You know, the average person spends 90,000 hours in work, and that's a long time to be unhappy. And it is just a job. You know, remember, when it only works, it only works when it all works. You know, it's got to work at home, it's got to work at work, it's got to work with your health. So, you know, if you're not enjoying your job, and it's 80-20, the perfect job doesn't exist, okay? But if you're 80% happy in your job, then you're doing really well. But if you're unhappy, think about moving, because, you know, life is too short. 90,000 hours on average, that is a lot of time to be unhappy. So that was just the last thing I wanted to say.
Great, thanks.
So you wanted me to say, you know, top tip?
Yeah, top tip. Introduce yourself and give us a top tip.
Oh, so my name is Anne Pickering. Until last year, I was the HR director and chief of staff at O2. My top tip, there's probably 2 actually. They don't link particularly well, but the 2 that have worked for me. One is start by starting. Quite often, you don't know where to begin. You're overwhelmed. You know, this is a big project he's asked me to do. I don't know where to start. Just pause and think about what are the building blocks, or the 2 or 3 things I can do over the next few weeks, and build on that. And that's how we nailed our inclusivity strategy O2. We started small and we finished by having 5 females on a 9-person executive team in 2019. That didn't just happen. So start small. I think it really helps you to get your head around when you're faced with a huge task, actually. And then the other piece of advice I would give, it's what I gave myself, and we talked about it earlier, Jonathan, is seek to understand. Don't assume anything, actually. An old manager in Marks and Spencer used to say to me, don't assume anything, Miss Butler. And although it was very patronising the way he said it, it was actually a very good piece of advice. You don't always know the right thing. So never assume, but seek to understand first, and then you can act upon that.
Brilliant. Well, stay on the air. But Anne Pickering, thank you very much for being on the Inspiring Leadership series. It's a real pleasure, and you have some wonderful stories to share. So thank you.
No, thank you.